got a Bible on his desk, and he tells the crew, look, it says right here that God cursed the men that we have in the holds down below, chained in the holds that we're going to take to be slaves. That God approved of this. And it says right here in the scriptures, right here, that Ham was cursed. And yet, it doesn't say that in the scriptures. Not at all. It says Canaan was cursed. And Canaan is not Ham. Okay? And I think we forget this. And Ham was one of the greatest of all, as was Shem, as was Japheth. They were chosen to come through on the ark, the sons of Noah, with their wives. That's all that came through. No one else came through. Those 8, if we follow the Bible account. Ham was a great man. God chose him to come through on that. Now, did he get tempted to steal his father's coat or do something? Possibly. But he was not cursed ever. It's never mentioned that Ham is cursed ever. So how did we get to all Africans being of Ham, for one thing? And then how did we get to all Africans being able to be made into slaves and steal their land and their gold and their silver and their riches and put them into slavery because of a curse that never happened? Yet that curse of Canaan, remember, it's Canaan, not Ham. But how did this lie get perpetuated such that it became the one reason that men could go in and steal, especially Europeans, we're going to put it that way, would go in and steal and colonize a whole continent, and even used it in going into the Americas and the Caribbean and Brazil and many other places, and used it as the excuse to colonize other people and subject them to steal and pillage and rob. So this misreading, if you want to call it that, I think it's just something else, but this misreading has gone back a long time. And it's affected everything, especially for us in the last 300, 400, 500 years, since the times of colonization of Americas, especially, and the edicts of the popes and that type of thing. But it's gone back a long way, and it has caused a huge amount of damage. And the fact is, it's complete fallacy. Complete. There's not anything to it at all. Canaan was cursed, not anyone else. Noah did not curse Ham. He cursed Canaan. Jubilees explains it very well. We're going to get into that in a second. But the issue is Canaan was cursed, not Ham. So let's go on. In Genesis 9:18-19, it says that Ham, Shem, and Japheth, their families, populated the whole earth. If we're a Bible believer. If you're not, that's fine. But that is the Bible account, that those 3 populated the whole earth and their sons. And it names their sons of all of them. And so what do we have and what do? We go, oh no, it's all of Ham when it's just Canaan. There is an incident, no doubt about it, where Ham is doing something with the coat of, maybe the coat of many colors, or the coat that came from Adam, or the vestment or something of Noah, that Noah is naked, as it says. But Ham is never cursed for that. It doesn't even say that he's even rebuked for it. Yes, his brothers covered up the nakedness of their father, but it doesn't say that he was ever cursed for that, nor his lineage for that. It says that Canaan was cursed. The Bible itself does not say why Canaan was cursed, but Jubilees does, and it's explicit, and it makes complete sense. Genesis explains exactly who the sons of Ham were. Kush, of the Kushites and Meroe and all that great area, and the Ethiopia and all through Somalia, that area. Then we have Put, which we believe to be the Libya, North Africa area. And we have Mizraim, who of course we associate with Egypt and that land, even going into the Levant. So then we have Canaan. His name, I dispute where they place Canaan, but that doesn't matter for this topic. So right from the very beginning, it is impossible, unless one is working from a racist or colonial idea, to get this scripture confused. It's very clear. So they didn't just get it wrong by accident. They did it, in my opinion, on purpose, for a narrative that they needed for, what they did and what happened. How did one small people, Canaan, who's only one of the 4 sons, then there's also Japheth and Shem. So how did this one son and his lineage become all of Africa? They didn't. They didn't need to. They just made Ham the cursed one, so then they could make all Africa be Ham and the descendants of Ham, which isn't even correct either. As I've shown in my other videos, Shem's lands were in sub-Saharan Africa. And I know that some will have trouble with that, but that's what I've researched and come to understand. And that is sub-Saharan Africa, or that colonial term. But that area below Sudan, Ethiopia, that whole area all the way to South Africa, was the land of Shem. But how did all those people and all of Ham, the Kush, the Mizraim, the Put, who never did anything wrong, how did they all get lumped in, the whole continent of Africa get lumped in as being Ham? Well, they needed Ham to be the whole continent, because then they could take the land and the gold and the diamonds and the silver and put the people into slavery. And I think we forget that the lineage of Ham is a great lineage. And I know for some of the Shemite viewers that watch my videos, they may have bad feelings towards the Hamites for different reasons. But then there's bad feelings among many of the people of Shem, as I just did in my video about brother selling brother, because it was the Bantu and the Yoruba and the Igbo selling each other, mainly the Bantu and the Yoruba, and part of Igbo also. But these people were doing this, was going on in the continent among each other. We're human, it's nature of humans. But when we look at the greatness of Ham, it really was the greatness of Ham. I know that Egyptologists want to whiten Egypt into being Mediterranean, but the reality is, I just did a video on that, it was, as Diop said, it was a black pharaohs, at least all the time up until the time of Greece. And many were Nubian, right? So when we get back there, we look at who were these great nation states. They were built by Ham. Shem did more of the rural cattle farming and that type of thing. Yes, they built some civilizations, of course, but nothing at the time to rival the kingdom of Egypt, nor among Japheth. Great kingdoms, but nothing to rival what happened in Egypt. And also in Nubia, which we tend to forget because it's never dug up. Archaeological, it's a shame. I'm going to show some pictures of this, but Meroe and all those areas, and I did a video on Babel, the Tower of Babel likely being where Sinar is today, between the White and the Blue Nile. But be that as it may, we can't prove it. But if that is where Nimrod, who was of Kush, and Kush is of the area of Nubia and down through that area, then we go, okay, then that great nation from Nimrod on down. And then we have Meroe, and I think Babylon was there as well, in my opinion. But these great nations we've not dug up. And why have we not dug up anything in those areas? Because it went against the colonial narrative. Just as they had to whitewash Egypt to make the convincement, to try to convince everybody that all the pharaohs were white guys coming from Norway. As you see the pictures that we have of the pharaohs and the movies and all that kind of thing. And instead of doing that and being historical, they had to have this narrative. And part of that narrative was they could not dig. They could not go and do archaeology in the upper Nile area. And there are just as many great ruins, and maybe even greater, in the upper Nile, in the Nubian Sudan and all that area. We just haven't gone and looked at it. It's not been done. No work's been done there. We dig everywhere else pretty much in the world, but we don't go there. This huge continent of Africa has had almost no archaeology done except in Egypt. And why? You have to go, why is that? Well, we don't want to find what we might find, I think, right? We certainly wouldn't want to find the Bible artifacts in Africa itself, but we also wouldn't want to show that the kingdom of Benin and the kingdom of Great Zimbabwe and all the other places in Mali, there's great kingdoms from long ago that existed and are gone. We wouldn't want to show that there were great kingdoms in Africa, because of course that would go against the narrative of the colonial powers as well. And I want you to understand, like I said, I just did this video on Diop, and I'll put a link to that down below. But the African peoples were believed to have not been possible. This is the colonial power speaking. They literally did not believe, this is only in the 1800s, the theory was that no one in Africa could have built Egypt that was African. They had to have been people that came in, conquered into Africa and built it, because they couldn't have in their minds, the old thing, they could not see that these were African people. And it took Diop almost his whole lifetime to try to convince some that these were African, that the pharaohs were African. So as I said, it's not just in the Nile. In Great Zimbabwe, Southern Africa, there's massive stone walls, there's ancestors of the Shona people, there's data between the 11th and 15th century. When the European colonists reached it, they refused point blank to credit local Africans with building it. The first archaeologist sent to look at these ruins in 1891. He was given an explicit brief from the British South African Company to find evidence that it wasn't built by Africans. And his successor in 1902 went further. He physically dug through and discarded roughly 12 feet of stratified archaeological layers, hunting for proof of foreign builders and destroying the very evidence that could have settled the question, and took until the 1920s and 30s for archaeologists to establish what should have been obvious from the start: built by Africans, for Africans, by a trading kingdom wealthy enough to import Chinese porcelain and Persian glass. Okay, that's these blinders that destroy us. And Benin, which is now Nigeria, built a walled capital and a court sophisticated enough to produce the Benin bronzes, which they're famous for. Work so advanced that some Europeans outright doubted Africans had made it. In 1897, a British force burned much of Benin City and looted thousands of those bronzes, many still sitting in European museums today, still the subject of active restoration rights. Of course, they pillaged everything. I mean, it's disgusting what happened in the colonial period, just disgusting. But that's the world we live in, fleeing Babylon. Oh my gosh. So the colonial powers, they had to have the narrative. They had to support it. So if something didn't support the narrative, either dig it and destroy it, or hide it, or sconce it away. Some of my viewers think that many things are hidden in the Vatican too. Could be. But hide it away in the museums in Europe. Hide it away even in Egypt in the museums. Hide the truth away. If they dig up and they find that all these artifacts show that it's a black people, you can knock the noses off, you can hide the proof. The reality was it's not even in our day. We're still facing the same issues to our day, that people still doubt. It takes a long time to change a mindset. Once you establish that Ham couldn't have been, all he was is to be a servant of servants, which isn't true. But if you establish that, then you have to justify it. And then you can't look back at what has been done. I can look back at what my fathers have done in Canada. They're not my direct ancestor that did all the things, but I can say that what happened in Canada to the native people is just as much colonial stuff as happened in Africa. Not as bad, of course, not to the slavery side of things, but to the theft of land and property and peoples and all that kind of stuff. Sure. And in the US, even worse. Complete eradication, to the point that many African Americans, as they call them, can't find their heritage, whether it's within Africa directly or whether their ancestors were actually Native Americans or Indians in the east coast of the US. Very difficult because of this colonial idea that black people or melanated people cannot have produced the great things that are in Africa and elsewhere. I want to mention that the Bible, of course, was written for the 12 tribes, basically, and then mainly Judah after the lost tribes are gone. So we see Kush mentioned and we see Mizraim, not much about mostly Mizraim because of their time in Egypt, and Kush because Moses married a Kushite, and the Kush people interacted a great deal with Israel, wherever Israel was at the time. As I said, I believe it was somewhere near Kenya, somewhere down in Africa. But in Pharaoh's day, I want to talk about one of the great of Ham, in my opinion. We overlook this story. We see it from our jaded one side. Think of the Pharaoh that worked with Joseph in Egypt. He could have taken that dream. He could have even had Joseph come in, taken his action with Joseph and put Joseph back in prison or sent him back to Canaan or whatever he felt like doing. But he elevated Joseph to be second in command in Egypt. So who gave the Pharaoh this dream? We don't think about it, but it was the Father. Our Father in heaven gave Pharaoh that dream. And he made him steadfast, that he didn't accept anybody else's word. And then when Joseph was finally brought forward and he interpreted the dream, how did Pharaoh know the interpretation was right? Well, he knew that Joseph, of course, got the dream, but how did he know the interpretation was right? Was he touched by the Spirit? I personally believe he was. And he must have loved Joseph because he elevated him to number 2 in the kingdom. And not only that, we don't read in the story. Why did Pharaoh have to bring in Joseph's family and allow them to stay? He didn't. He could have loved Joseph, put him up, but he put them in, we think Goshen was some slave land. It wasn't. The Pharaoh put them in the best of lands, the best of lands. I personally believe it was in the upper Nile area, or up near the Aswan Dam area, somewhere in that area, where the Valley of the Kings was and where the Pharaohs were living at the time. But be that as it may, anyway, he put them in the best land. It's only later pharaohs that turned to wickedness and enslaved the people. But the Pharaoh that welcomed Joseph was, at least in my opinion, a righteous man. Maybe not living the code that the 12 tribes couldn't live either, but be that as it may. But he was a good man, a very good man, as was Jethro, who helped Moses, who was, of course, a Midianite. But he must have been married into Kush as well, because Miriam said that Moses' wife was a Kushite. Then we get the Queen of Sheba. She travels and meets with Solomon and possibly was a wife. But her son, I think it's Melanic or something like that. But there's this story that the ark ended up back with them. In 1 Kings 10, it says, in this interaction with the Queen of Sheba. But the Bible tells us this much and no more. But by Ethiopian tradition, in the Kebra Nagast, it goes much further than what the Bible does, holding that she had a son through Solomon, Melanic, like I said, who founded the Ethiopian royal line and later brought the Ark of the Covenant to Axum, a real ancient tradition. But tradition, it's not scripture, but it's tradition. Okay, so we understand that. But there is a time, we know, I've covered this in another video, I'll leave a link for that one as well, that the ark was taken out of the temple because it was in at the time of David and Solomon, and then it was by the time of King Josiah, he asked for the ark to be returned. Where it was, I can't say, but possibly it really was up in Axum, hiding away from the wicked kings of Judah at the time. Then we move to the New Testament, and really one of the great stories of conversion is in Acts. A court official of Candace, queen of the Ethiopians, was baptized by Philip on the spot and sent home carrying the gospel with him. It's one of the earliest records or recorded conversations outside of Jerusalem, and it's a Kushite man that's doing the carrying and is converted and goes back to his people. So a Mizraimite kingdom or Pharaoh saves the family that writes the whole Bible comes from famine. Of course, we have Moses' wife, then the Queen of Sheba, and then we have this Philip on the road going there. And then I want to talk a minute about the Ethiopian Bible, which I've covered in another video, but just quickly, the Ethiopian Bible text, who saved that text? All the awakening dry bones of Shem and wherever they have been scattered, the diaspora. Where are they getting their scriptures from? I use the Book of Jubilees. Others use Maccabees and other different books, Ezra, Esdras, and all that kind of thing. Where did these books come from? They came from the Kushites in the language of Geats, of the Ethiopians, who preserved the scriptures outside, and this is so important, outside the influence of Rome. And when I say Rome, I'm including the Pharisees who worked with Rome. Because the scriptures we have in the Bible, any Bible we have, other than the one that comes from the Septuagint, every Bible we have comes from the Pharisees and Rome. And it's been played with, absolutely. And I'll put a couple things here, just as clips so you can see, and you can go study that out for yourself. But the Ethiopians were never conquered. And the scriptures, I don't know that it was directly from Philip, you know, that these, I don't know, it was a conversion of Philip that converted his people, could be. But the issue is they preserved the scriptures from almost the time of Christ. We have the earliest scriptures and books that were lost, like I said, of Jubilees and so many others. But when we look at these books, do we go, oh, thank you, Kushites, thank you, Ham, for saving for our people, the Shemites or Japheth? Do we thank the people of Ham for the greatness that they have done? I don't know of any people that have been more kind to the Israelites, even among the people of Shem. The people of Ham were more kind, in my opinion, to the people of the Bible than any of the other groups. Okay, any of them. And I just think that needs to be said, because when we slander a whole people and call everybody Ham and then slander them, we aren't looking at their greatness. We aren't looking at their ruins and going, yeah, Egypt, yep, that's Ham, yep, and all the cities along Libya and cities that used to be in the desert of Sahara that are lost now, or the Meroe and all the ruins there. We can't look at those people and go, hey, they were nothing. They were the great ones. Show me a ruin anywhere in Europe, anywhere, or even into Russia, anywhere that is old as Meroe or the pyramids of Egypt. But there's pyramids in Meroe that have never been even looked at hardly. And they are still standing after, 4,000, 5,000 years. Go into Europe and find anything that's standing from 1,500 years. The castles in Europe are not very old. The Roman ruins, yes, they dig up some Roman ruins in Britain and places, but they have to dig them up. They weren't like Meroe, which is still standing with pyramids, or Egypt with pyramids still standing. I also want you to think, for all of you that do love the Bible, as I do, think about where anywhere in the Bible, does it say anything against Ham, against people by different races, by colors, by skin, all of that. It's not in there, not at all. Joseph, by all accounts, as great as Judah. There is this conflict between Judah and Ephraim, of course, the son of Joseph. But Joseph himself married into what? A lineage of Ham. Judah himself, the other lineage, married a Canaanite. And some of the other brothers, I believe all the other brothers, probably married Canaanites or Egyptians, because that's who they were living among. But it doesn't say, so I don't want to say what the text doesn't say. But of the three brothers that it names wives, Joseph, Judah, and Simeon, they all married into Hamite, and Moses as well. So why, if there really was this curse upon Ham, why do we have all these Bible greats, the top Bible greats, marrying into these peoples? It doesn't make any logical sense if they believe that they were all cursed. They even married in, as I said, with Judah and Simeon, they married into Canaan, who was supposedly cursed. But were they cursed because of a color or a race? No, they were cursed because, we're going to read about that in a second, about land, about theft, about breaking covenant. And if we're honest, who broke covenant more than anyone? Well, that's the 12 tribes. They broke covenant all the time, which is why in Deuteronomy 28, we have what we have. So yes, Canaan was cursed, but it wasn't all of Africa. It wasn't all of Africa. It wasn't all of the Americas. It wasn't wherever someone is a different race that they were cursed because of something in the Bible. That's just colonial wicked thinking. I want to mention quickly here, I'm not a Paul fan, as most of you know, but Paul was mistaken for an Ethiopian by a Roman, right? And you go, okay, well, that means he was likely African looking, right? But don't even need to go there. So we have to remember that even into the 14th, 15th, 16th century, did they have the scriptures? Yes, they read it more than we did. At least the priests and the leaders who had, and the Catholics, they knew what it said. And then when Protestant revivalism came along with Luther, they had the scriptures. And in England, they had the scriptures. People knew, at least by the 1500s, 1600s, the King James Version came out and all that. People studied it. If you go back and look at the 16th, 17th century, they were Bible scholars, better in a sense than we are in our day. They truly studied it to the depth. So they knew that the curse was the curse of Canaan, not the curse of Ham. But preachers in religion, I need to say that, and slaveholders, they made a new move, as did the Pope, and I'm going to do a separate video on that because that deserves another video. But instead of citing the curse correctly on Canaan, they moved it up one generation onto Ham himself, and from there onto any person with melanated skin. So by the time the European powers were building the colonization of Africa and the conquest of the Americas, this was already in place, and they just used what they needed to justify what they were going to do. It fit their narrative. It wasn't true, not even slightly, can't even be biblically proven at all, as I've said, but that is what they needed, so that's what they did. I need to be very clear about this. This wasn't some scholars carefully wrestling, as they do, with an ambiguous text from the Bible about this verse about Canaan. This was people who had already decided to enslave human beings and steal their land and their everything else. They needed to reach, and they did. They reached backwards for a text that could be bent to cover what they were doing and justify it. Finding a 1,000 year of prior misreading, okay, they loosened it up even more and made everybody Ham. And this got preached from the American pulpits, in Europe as well, but really in the Americas, of course, and especially in the South. This was used to justify slavery right through until the Civil War era. But really it was used to justify taking the native people's lands as well. It was the justification for all that they were doing. I mentioned Nelson Mandela. In 1948, in South Africa, as it built its entire apartheid system completely on this doctrine of Ham, the Dutch Reformed Church pointed to this same Genesis 9:25 and 10:6 as scriptural grounds for permanent racial segregation, right up until international Reformed churches finally condemned it as a heresy in 1982. But it took 40 years. And you'd think that people could read. You'd think that the people in South Africa that were the Dutch or the British, you think that they could read? Of course they could read. I think they know that it didn't say that Ham was cursed, but it fit the narrative. But the crazy thing for me is that this is within my lifetime. This happened in so close to. I mean, like I said, I'm just over 60, and this is through my memory, my own memory of apartheid and what happened, and Nelson Mandela coming to power and all that kind of thing. And I don't want to get into how the who's and whys and wherefores, but the reality that this Ham lie continued on for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years to justify injustice from one people towards another so that they could justify taking land, money, gold, everything. Even down to the safaris. When you look at the safaris, who's the guides? Who are the people that run everything? And who are most of the people that come in to do the hunting and to do the sightseeing? It's mostly a certain way. So these things don't change very easily. I don't know if they'll ever change within my lifetime. I can't see it. These things are deep and hard to get rid of. As I discussed in my video about Diop and his trying to change the idea of scholars about Egypt, his whole lifetime. And did they change just slightly, the scholars? Not completely, just slightly. But to the people, if we went to the cinema even 15, 20 years ago and watched the gods of Egypt, who were actors in the gods of Egypt? Were they people that looked like Ham, or the people that we would associate with Gentiles and Japheth, or Europeans? Well, they're Europeans, clearly. So we then place Europeans in Africa as the people that ran Africa as the pharaohs, and nobody questioned. That's the scary thing. I myself, we don't question it. We don't think about it. I never did at the time. Now I would go like, I don't even want to watch the movie. If that's who you have in it, I got no interest in the movie. But even to this day, if you put even to this day, I believe that if we made a movie today about the Ten Commandments and redid the Ten Commandment movie and put in all black actors, including Moses, everybody, all black actors, or African actors. What would you find? Would people accept that? Absolutely not. Even people in Africa, I believe, wouldn't accept it, because we've been given this 400, 500,000 year narrative that is a complete fabricated falsehood lie, but it takes so long to change our minds. And as I said, my channel is Fleeing Babylon. And I did a video called Seeing Babylon. If you cannot, see it, you can't see what they've done and what they're still doing, you can't flee it. So you will partake of their sins. So if you go to a movie and you say, oh, those are black actors or African actors, I can't watch it when they're portraying the Egyptians, you're partaking of the sins still. Until we are able to open our eyes and see, we are partaking in the sense that we are believing the lies. We have to get to where we can find the truth, at least think about it, consider it, and then come to our own conclusion and not believe what has been fed to us, spoon-fed for hundreds of years, for a narrative that was a unjustifiable nightmare for the people that it happened to. In Jubilees, it is clear, crystal clear, I'll put the quote here, but it's crystal clear that Canaan knew he was going to get cursed. His brothers warned him not to steal Shem's land. So he stole Shem's land, in my opinion, the land around Kenya or somewhere in Africa down there, Congo, Uganda, somewhere down there, let's just say. But Canaan took land that was not his. And if we read the account, we read that Mizraim got one piece of land, Kush got a piece of land, and Put got a land that was west of the land of Mizraim. And Canaan was supposed to get a land that was west of the land of Put, which in my opinion would put it over somewhere towards Morocco. But he didn't want that land. He wanted a better land. His land must have been decent enough still, right? But he didn't want that land. He wanted and envied Shem's land, so he stole it. And he got cursed for it. So then we understand why Noah cursed Canaan. Why that in the Bible is not more explicit is not something I can figure out. But in the Book of Jubilees, it is explicit, and for me, it makes complete logical sense. It's easy that's for sure. And then you can see why the brothers could feel comfortable marrying into Canaan, and like Judah and Simeon, they were comfortable. It didn't seem to be a big deal. Did the fathers want their kids marrying into those other lineages? No, they wanted them to marry into the Shemite, their ancestors, which is fair. But they did marry Canaanites, right? They weren't cursed. They didn't believe they were cursed in that way as a person individually, or any more than, when Moses married into a Kushite line that mixed with Shem, I suppose. But he didn't have any problems with that. So when we see that the curse in Jubilees, Canaan was cursed for breaking covenant about land. That was the covenant. He broke it, he got cursed, and he knew and he said, bring on the curse. I don't care, I'm going to do it. Now, what other people do we read about that had covenant and they broke their covenant on purpose? Well, that would be the 12 tribes of Israel. Absolutely. The lost tribes with Jezebel and Habit and her husband, and the 450 priests of Baal and Elijah having to go hide in the wilderness. They knew what was in Deuteronomy, but they chose what? No, we don't want that. Just like when Israel chose a king, and God said and the father said to Samuel, they've rejected me, not you. Same thing here. They chose the kingdom of this world. They chose the god of this world, the Baal and Moloch and Asherah. They chose that, on knowing full well. It wasn't like they were blinded. They knew full well that they were choosing a different god than the God of Israel. And so they were wiped out by the Assyrians and taken away, the lost tribes. And then we read about Judah. It went into wickedness too, even though it was preserved for another 100-something years, 200 years. They also, Jeremiah comes and warns them about the same thing. The Baal worship, the Moloch, the Asherah, the fires, the things they're doing with their children. And he warns them as well. What do? We don't care. We want the curse. We don't care. Bring it on. And then we look at the time of the Savior. He comes back and Judah gets another chance. And the few tribes that are still there with him, the mixture. And what do they say? They reject him outright. There's a few, of course, that accept him. We know that with the 12 and the women and that kind of thing. But the great majority are like Nazareth or the Pharisees. And they go, mm-mm. The Pharisees actually said it, at least in the Bible. It says it's better for this one man to die than that we lose our place and our nation. So they were following a different God. They were not following the God of Israel. They were following, as Jesus said, a different father. And because of that, they on purpose chose to receive the curse. You think that the Pharisees and the people of Nazareth didn't know the scriptures? Of course they knew it was Canaan that was cursed, but they also knew Deuteronomy 28. And if you break it, they'd already seen what happened to the lost tribes. They'd already seen what happened in Babylon, where very few of them even lived to experience Babylon and come out. So when this happened with Jesus, when he was there, or Jesus, what happened? The same thing. They chose for their ancestors, just like Canaan chose for their ancestors to have difficulty and be cursed. They chose it. Does that make what the colonial powers and the European powers did to all the peoples of Africa and everywhere else and the slave trade? Not at all. They will pay with the Father. They'll have to answer for that themselves. But at the same time, I just did a video on brother selling brother, meaning that it wasn't just that it was only those, like me, the white guys. It wasn't only the colonial powers that did some of this. There was also slavery's been around from Bible times. All those things. Inhumanity to other humans has been going on. Look at Babylon, look at Assyria, look at Greece, Rome, all the way through. It's a common thing. But yes, people will have to answer to the justice of God. I believe that, certainly. But at the same time, we have to get back to what is real. And the reality is, Ham was never cursed. Africans are not cursed. Not even North Africans. If you want to believe, as I do, that Shem is more the southern Africans, the Igbo, the Yoruba, the Bantu, and those peoples. The Koishona, another group that's different. But most of sub-Saharan Africa being made up of people of Shem, fine. And most of North Africa and the Middle East, somewhat, being of Ham. That's okay. But do you think all those people are cursed by God so that they can become slaves and lose their land and be controlled by European powers? Not at all. That's not what it says, nor is it what the Bible says at all, nor is it what Jesus was actually like and what he talked like and how he treated people. It isn't the way of the Bible at all. So when we look at people that people consider of a certain group today, do we say, oh yeah, you guys, you're cursed? No. People still think Ham was cursed. Why? Because we've been given that narrative. But who really was cursed much more than Canaan? It was those that broke the covenants of Moses. They were cursed more than any other group. And yet do we look at them, anybody that we think are in that group, and say that they were cursed? No, we don't. So why are we looking at Africans and saying, yeah, they were cursed because of Canaan, when Canaan was only one son of Ham? I want us to understand this one point, all of us, whether you're Shem, Ham, Japheth, whatever, if you are watching this. The curse of Canaan was not forever, in my opinion. I don't believe that. Okay? The curse was over the fathers and that type of thing. Who knows even among who the Canaanites are? And please don't listen to these things that say the Canaanites are certain little pygmies and that kind of stuff. That's just fallacy. Can't be proven. The Canaanites were beautiful enough that Judah and Simeon wanted to marry into their families, okay? They weren't something that we say in our day. The fact of the matter, if we believe that the Father, and we do, because the Bible, all the prophets talk about the fact that even though these 12 tribes did the things they did, and even though the Savior was put to death, even through all of that, what do we read in the prophets? Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Amos, all the different prophets. They speak of the restoration of the dry bones, the coming back of the people, that God is merciful, and he extends his hand of mercy to all peoples. So if he's going to bring back the cursed people of the Bible who are not Canaan, they are mentioned, yes, as one, but the great amount of cursing comes from Deuteronomy 28. And yet we, and I believe, 100% they are coming back, and that curse will go away. What happened because of fathers' poor choices will be forgiven and made right. And I believe the same for those of Canaan. They have to be, or else the Father is not just. How can he treat one group one way and allow them to come back, and not treat another group another way and allow them to come back? I don't believe that. And I believe the Gentiles or Japheth, same thing. I believe, yes, those that did wickedly will pay for their wickedness. But those that are righteous, that attach themselves or come and want to be part of the covenant and be part, they'll be welcomed in. And that is what Isaiah says, that they will be a light to the Gentiles. It speaks about the Gentiles being brought back in. Doesn't mean they're going to take the place of the 12 tribes, but it means that they'll be brought back in. So as you know, I'm not a doctor of scholarship of the Bible, that type of thing, but I can read, and you can too. And anything I've said, please go check it out. Even the older writings of Origen and those type of things, go look into everything that I've said, please, and check it out. You always should anyway. You shouldn't believe anybody, me or anyone else. But understand that as I read it, Canaan can be forgiven, just as Judah and all the lost tribes can be forgiven when they change the behavior that brought about the problems in the first place. I do believe that Ham is a great people, as great really as Japheth or Shem. They're different, completely different peoples. I am going to do another video on that issue, but they are very different peoples. But we can't just curse off a whole continent or a whole race or a whole group by some misused quote in the Bible. It's harmful and does great damage, and still is doing damage. If you enjoy the work and want to support me down below and join my community, or if you feel you'd like to, I have a Patreon now, I'll put the link there as well. And if you'd like to listen to the videos without any ads. And here is a video that I just did, as I said, about Egypt. And here's another one that I think you'll really enjoy. Anyway, take care and have a good day. Thanks. Bye-bye.